Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory body of the City of Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexation, master plans, and major site development plans, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card and present it to the recording secretary. We ask that you come to the microphone to speak so that all comments may be recorded. The order of the proceedings for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff. Applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Members of the audience will be invited to come forward to offer comments and questions. Once public comment is closed, city and staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all presentations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and the applicant for clarification. With that, we will move on to the first item on the agenda, which is introduction of the commission members.
Julie Winter.
Mike Clayton.
Mike Sullivan.
John Emery.
Mike LaPetra.
Matthew Voss.
All right. We'll go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is approval of minutes for June 7th, 2023. I have a motion. Oh, approval of agenda. Yeah, sorry. Approval of agenda. Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. And now we move on to approval of the minutes of June 7th, 2023. Do I have a motion for that?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. All right, and now we will open it for the public forum. If there's anyone from the public that would like to speak on matters not on the agenda, feel free to step up to the microphone. Seeing none, we'll move on to public hearing on the rezone of 314 Bourne Avenue from GI, General Industrial Zone, to SGA, Government Airport District.
Good evening. So the City of Ames Electric Department is the applicant for this. So we are the owner of this property on Bourne Avenue. The city already has a storage facility essentially for Ames Electric on the site. They're looking to add another building onto the site. So the use is allowed within general industrial. However, because of the conditions of the site, the zoning makes it not optimal for how they would like to approach adding a storage facility on this building. So they have requested to take advantage of rezoning the site to government airport zoning, which is a zone that is exclusively reserved for government-owned property and for government uses. We believe that although the use could be done in general industrial, we believe the rezoning to the government zoning does fit with the area in terms of the use is going to be the same. It doesn't change the use. What it does allow is for them to situate the building in relation to the railroad track to the north in a little bit better position for how the site's utilized. Gives them a little more flexibility on the site improvements related to storage areas. And then, like I said, the setbacks would apply to the building. So overall, we in the comp plan have this area designated as general commercial, even though it's zoned to general industrial. So this is an area that was broadly looked at as being an area to go to a hybrid of, I would say, light industrial and commercial uses. We don't have a zoning district that implements that yet. That's one of those implementation measures from Plan 24 that's yet to be done. And then when it comes to government zoning, it is not its own land use designation necessarily within the plan. A lot of government property was designated that to reflect that it was a city facility or a state facility or something along those lines, but we did not make it a one-to-one relationship requirement that all government property was mapped as government or civic in the land use plan. So when we take into consideration these existing uses and conditions, we think that you can support the rezoning to SGA with the continued designation as general commercial. So is there any questions about the proposal? If there is one representative from Ames Electric here, if you had a question.
This is on East Lincoln Way.
Yeah, it's about two blocks north of Lincoln Way. Right, so the very bottom left corner of this drawing is where resource recovery is. Used to be the old coal piles across the street.
Okay, now I know.
I'll use those place markers for you. The old coal pile.
Yes, that would be. Used to deliver coal there.
Yeah. And the use to the south is a kind of a compilation of industrial uses, but for the most part, it's a mini storage and storage facility. So it doesn't have any particular sensitivity to any uses out here. So there's some outdoor storage and there's indoor storage on that facility.
Any questions for city staff? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on and give the, well, I guess that covers the applicant and the city staff. So if it's, do we,
I think unless you have a question, I doubt you have. Do you
You have
want
a
to add
statement?
anything?
okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I want to just make sure if you had questions, you had some staff here that could answer things more
Yep.
than I could.
okay. And is there anyone in the public that would like to come up and comment on this agenda item? Seeing none. Yeah, is there any other comments, I guess, or anything else from commission?
Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
City can-
Okay. All right. Well, does anyone have a motion?
Yes, motion for alternative one, Planning and Zoning Commission, we can recommend that the city council approve the request to rezone 1.68 acres of the property at 314 Bourne Avenue from GI General Industrial to SGA, Government Airport District.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Yeah. The next item on the agenda is the zoning text amendment on retail parking rates.
Good evening. Earlier this year, Overflow Thrift Store met with staff to review for a preliminary meeting for a new building they plan to construct on Southeast 2nd Street, just east of their current location at the corner of Southeast 2nd Street and South Duff. And out of that meeting, staff alerted Overflow that their parking was insufficient for the use that they had proposed. The parking rate for retail is 1 space per 300 square feet, and the rate that, or the amount of parking that they had proposed was roughly 1 space per 470 square feet. Representatives from Overflow did contact City Council requesting a text amendment, and Council just a few weeks ago reviewed options that were presented by staff, and the two main ones were modifying the standards for minimum off-street parking requirements for all retail sales and services general, and modifying the standards just for thrift stores. Council did choose the first option for all retail sales and services general. And there's in one of the attachments as well are all the lists of uses that would fall under that category, under that heading. The proposed ordinance changes the minimum parking requirements to 1 space per 500 or 2 spaces per 1,000. It's the same thing. We're slowly trying to go towards writing it, our parking requirements so that they're all denominated in 1,000, just because it's a little bit easier to read. The proposed amendment also cleans up a few of the related uses to retail, including printing and financial institutions. Deleting those will mean that the rates for those uses will default to retail sales and services general. Staff does recommend the changes as they are presented in attachment C, and I can take any questions.
I guess my only question was when I was reading it, I think it was on the staff memo at the front. You raised a good point about this, which was that I think in general going above the 1 spot per 500 is good. It makes good business sense and it's flexibility for folks. But then there was one note about office space being 1 space per 300 square foot still.
It is.
I'm just wondering, like a lot of times you have retail spaces going back and forth in between. Sometimes they'll flip to office space and vice versa, just, afterwards. That would actually keep us from doing that. They wouldn't be allowed to turn that space into office space at all at that point? Or would that be a variance potentially if that circumstance were to arise or?
So right now, if the retail and the office space are the same, yes, at 1 per 300. So if you had a building or a multi-unit, shopping center, you could use the space for, assuming the zoning allowed it, which it probably would. You could use it for either office or for retail. So any existing shopping center, I would say, or individual building is parked at the 1 per 300 and will, I'd say, not be affected.
Right.
For new development, the developer would have to plan that in advance. So it could possibly limit if you parked a new development at the proposed 1 per 500 rate, then it might limit you in the future for converting it to office.
And again, I wouldn't see that as we're not talking about a big box store that would convert to office space, but more so a smaller square footage parcel in some place. I generally feel like I'm in favor of the change, but that's the one thing that I saw that I wonder, has staff talked about at all changing the office space 1 per 300 at all? Or is that nothing has come up and that's where it stands?
Yeah, I mean, this came about specifically because of a retail use, and so that's where the discussion was focused. We weren't given direction from council to have a bigger, wider discussion about parking rates.
Yeah, so I think, you've seen a lot of text amendments about parking in the last 6 months. We dealt with medical office, didn't touch general office. Now we're touching retail, so it has not been a comprehensive look. And
Maybe it'll come up down the road.
great. So yeah, I think there is some concern because we talked about the rate of 1 per 500, 2 per 1,000 making sense because it was comparable to other rates to let the furniture display stores and those other things have interchangeable uses. It's just, in any shopping center or restaurant doesn't just switch into office or retail. So I guess we decided, right, we landed on that it's kind of incumbent on the developer to pick their choices when they design the site. Just because you planned it all for office and retail in the past and then you want to do it in restaurant, the answer would have still been no because you didn't have restaurant level parking.
Oh yeah, the restaurant parking is.
So I think we decided it's kind of always been up to the developer to figure out their mix for the shopping center. And once they do, they're going to have to live with it.
Okay.
And I guess that's where I kind of landed. I don't know that I would say the office probably could go down also. But we didn't look at that. I think, again, medical office was a different animal. There's clearly a higher demand for that versus general office. Office is really highly variable, in my opinion. It kind of depends on how that, is it corporate office? Is it an insurance agent? Like what exactly are those types of uses?
Or even,
how do you pack them into the space?
Yeah.
You used to park office at 5 per 1,000, not just 3 per 1,000 because people had so much tighter usage and now you have more open areas and different ways of platooning people in and out of space. So office is kind of all over the map when you look at the different styles of it, but we just call it one thing now. It's
Yeah.
just office.
No, I think that sounds fair. It sounds like maybe if that comes up, we can cross that bridge when we get there. But I thought that was a good note on the staff comments, just that that's not going to be the same now if we change retail to something else.
Yeah, so I'm generally in favor of moving towards this direction with parking. But the question I have looking at this attachment E, I was just wondering, and you kind of touched on it, Kelly, but we're kind of coming at this little parts at a time and kind of piecemeal. I'm wondering is there any appetite or interest in like looking at it a little more comprehensively? And I'm just wondering if you make changes kind of to individual, property or individual types of properties at one time rather than just looking at everything at once. Is there any interest in taking a more comprehensive look, I guess, at parking? Because it all kind of affects, it can affect, other things as you looking at it comprehensively, I guess, is one of them would be important.
Whether I want to or not, I think there's probably only 3 categories left that you would look at. And then you go into the industrial category. That'd be the other place where we get comments about, do I really have to do this much? So we have a 2 per 1,000 standard for just your basic industrial service and for manufacturing until you get to 50,000. And then we drop it to 1 per 1,000. And then warehousing, a lot of people want to call themselves warehousing to get down to 1 per 5,000, even when they're not a warehouse. Like a warehouse is truly a defined use. It's not just big open space all the time. So industrial is probably the one that we get the most comments on. We're dealing with the bank facilities and some other stuff that had that sort of retail-ish nature right now. So we did try to deal with everything that fit in a relationship with retail in this one. So I think it only leaves office and industrial. All those other things that are in here, I don't have a reason to change them. The sports, the fitness, the auditoriums, the clubs, all that, schools, all that stuff. I probably wouldn't want to look at that. Like, I don't know that there's going to be a rationale to change those. Restaurants, I don't have a reason really to change those either, probably. So comprehensively, I think we could look at industrial, which would include office probably, but that's about it.
Okay. Thank you.
What it boils down to is they're asking for a decrease of about a third in their parking on thrift stores.
They are asking for, they want less parking. Yeah, yes, it is a third. Sorry, I didn't just doing the trying to find where the numbers are.
I guess you proposed 2 options, but
So
I guess how many thrift stores do we have in Ames? Do we have an idea?
We didn't write a definition to explore that, but I think it doesn't really matter what you think things are in downtown. The secondhand stores there's no parking required downtown, so I don't really have to get into what we talked about is secondhand goods consignment. How do you start to think about what that is in relation to a quote thrift store? So that's what we were thinking about. So
Goodwill, that'd be a
Goodwill would count. Like if you're going to take that kind of a definition of secondhand goods that are sold at a below market pricing strategy, or not a new goods, it's for sale. I don't know where consignment stores, antique stores, stuff like that would fall into the equation. That's a detail we didn't quite get to.
So the Ames does not have a definition for that.
We do not. I would say it's rare to have that. You could develop a definition for it, but I think most people don't usually apply a different parking rate to something like a thrift store.
But if we went with alternative number 2, you'd have to write one.
Correct. And we'd have to create brackets for it that are definable and distinguishable from something else.
Right.
That would be a nightmare.
I mean, like I said, it would pivot around that secondhand goods kind of concept. I don't think anybody thinks antique stores are overrunning the world with parking demands. So it's probably not too hard to do. There's I had some concerns about how pawn shops would get classified. I did not feel like that fit the same kind of category as the other things we're talking about, but that's easy to find a pawn shop differently than a thrift store because they have other, I mean, they're a licensed facility that has a lot of other things going on besides secondhand goods on the site. So that was the only one I wanted to make sure wasn't included. Otherwise, I wasn't too worried about exactly who fit that definition.
I don't know about you guys, but I kind of think it's a good idea. 1 space per 500. If you look at all these other Iowa cities, I like that was provided. That was helpful because, I mean, Ames is similar in some ways to Des Moines. We're in that same metro area, and Des Moines is approaching a 1 space per 400 and a 1 space per 600 for furniture and appliance stores. If we go to 1 space per 500, that could create a better business climate to, be more flexible to new builds that are happening here, new commercial. And this isn't, and again, in some ways we're overbuilt in parking in other areas. So maybe we need to reverse that. If you look here and you see Madison, Wisconsin, even though it's a large city, requires no retail parking requirements in many parts of the city. So it's, it seems reasonable, 1 per 500 or 2 per 1,000.
I agree. I mean, I think my only concern or potential concern was what you asked about the office space. But
Yeah.
that might be something that we can look at in the future.
But you did say anything downtown, like if there were infill, there's no parking requirements.
So
for downtown.
So DSC has a whole separate column in the parking code, and no restaurant, bar, office, or retail use requires parking.
Okay. So at least that's not an impediment because that's where,
So Campus Town and downtown do not have parking for basically commercial businesses.
Okay.
Just for housing, hotels, and maybe major event space or something like that.
so if we'd be talking about new build construction, approximately where in the city would that be taking place? Potentially like strip malls or anything like that?
So yeah, I think part of that, so like where essentially the commercial areas would be southwest Mortensen area, out east, like by Pizza Ranch, and then your standard Lincoln Way and Duff Avenue areas. And then, I mean, the other nodes of commercial are yet to be seen. They would be in the growth areas of the city further east to the south and to the west.
Okay. Well, it sounds like maybe we can cross that bridge when we get there. That's the only concern I go back to is if somebody wants to flip it into an office space later on, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I think it sounds like a great idea.
So in the world of, so the existing spaces, like you said, that won't be an issue because they've already been parked at the higher rate. It would really just be the new builds from here on out. And again, they should be able to plan for that to some degree.
And many of, I would say, retail centers are, this is just a minimum rate. So there's no maximum. You can put as much parking as you want, really. And I do know, and this isn't really something we can control, but for financing purposes, banks will often require a certain amount of parking anyway. So
Right.
there are other considerations that go in.
I mean, my thought would be like, so I live up near North Ames. We've got like T-Mobile stores and places that would be considered retail and those new strip malls there. Those could easily turn office if somebody were to vacate that. That would be pretty easy to do that. So places like that wouldn't have the flexibility for that retail space, but
Except for they would because they were built at a higher standard.
Oh, they were.
Right.
Oh,
So that
and it doesn't
anything that's
apply.
existing.
That's right.
So
Okay.
anything that's existing will be able to flip back and forth.
Yeah.
Because they were always the same standards until now.
Mhm.
So it's only something that's going to be built after today.
I,
That
I would,
theoretically won't be able to flip.
I would say the one thing that this would do to an existing shopping center is that it would mean that now, if you were, parked right at the minimum of 1 per 300, now you have parking spaces that you could potentially do something else with. So you could potentially put another building on them, for instance,
Mhm.
which is something that we have seen in Ames. We've lowered the parking rates over the years. For instance, the North Burgies by the Fairway. That store was developed, that Fairway store was developed at a much higher grocery parking rate, that because it was reduced, then that space could be used. for
Would that free up the North Grand Mall too?
So
If
North
that-
Grand's in its own adaptive reuse plan. So it's just different than everything else across the city.
Okay.
So it just has a uniform standard for all uses that council approved 10 years ago. So it has ultimate flexibility. I think that the Fairway example is a good example of all of this because grocery stores are probably the one retail use that really need more than 2 per thousand. And we used to require, I think, 5 per thousand. Is that what Fairway was? So I think it was at least
Something
5
like
per
that.
thousand when Fairway was built, but then we dropped everything to the 3.3 per thousand. So that
Mhm.
freed up unused parking space for that coffee shop to show up. When we did the downtown Fairway, we told them you can build less parking. They refused. They said politely, we're already building less parking than what corporate wants us to build. So that was an example where they could have had at least 15 less spaces in that parking lot. And they insisted that that was the absolute minimum they could live with, is what they built there. So there's an example of where we were willing to go less. And the corporate answer was, we need more. So I think that works for almost everybody. There's not an obvious user that would probably take advantage of this and cause an issue that wouldn't be anticipated.
My one big concern is pushing parking out into the neighborhood. Again, if you just start that, then it's,
So I think we've heard that and we thought about that a little bit. I think when you take a look at how the commercial zoning is situated in Ames and you look at those major corridors, there's very little opportunity to infiltrate back into neighborhoods. So most of the Lincoln Way sites, they have a hard edge with the neighborhoods. They don't have a lot of side streets that are going to penetrate into the neighborhoods. I think 6th and 7th Street is the one area that's maybe different than that, where you do see on-street parking kind of go to the north because of downtown and because of those uses. But South Duff isn't going to have that issue. Those Mortensen properties aren't going to have that issue. So we've heard that and we thought about that. We just didn't feel like it was really going to happen in most areas of the city. And you already have that with neighborhood commercial and downtown zoning already. And this doesn't change that. So to me, it's a real interest. We thought as applied, in reality, it isn't going to happen to a point where we need to be concerned about it.
that the overflow parking into a place won't flow out into the neighborhoods
For the thrift store, you're saying, or you're talking about in general?
in general.
So in general, I don't think how our commercial properties are located is going to lend itself to people being able to conveniently park in residential areas and go to those businesses. And they're just not. They're cut off at the back alleys or back property lines. There just isn't access to most of those places. Like if you're going to go to West Hy-Vee, you're not going to drive around the block and park down on
No, they got plenty of
Street,
parking
right?
too.
Well, but they could get rid of it now, right? Like they could drop 30% of their parking and put something else there. Right?
But again, with grocery stores, they're not going to do that. 'cause if
Hy-Vee's
they-
not going to do
no.
that. Yes, but
Just like Fairway won't do it because
right. So Hy-Vee's not going to do that. I agree. There, as long as Hy-Vee's there will not be less parking than what is there. But that's my example, is that if there was a shortage of parking, there's not an easy way to go park in the neighborhood there. I mean, you can, but
well, you run into that problem with any kind of venue going on out in campus or out in CY Stevens and all that. You get people pushed out into
that's events. Like we're not managing events. So none of this
Right.
is meant to manage events in anything in our code.
and you get that also with when you have stuff going on downtown.
So again,
You don't handle
so
that.
this doesn't impact downtown. So downtown
Right.
is already a zero parking requirement. This does not impact that. So I'm talking only in the context of where we require parking. It does not seem like there's a demand to push parking into the neighborhoods. It's just not really feasible. It's not an enticement to like underpark yourself and push people blocks away from your site. Downtown is driven by events again. When they're in the neighborhoods, it's because we have streets closed and you can't use all the parking that we have.
Well, and I think the argument with lowering the minimums, it's incumbent upon the business to plan properly for what they, it's on them. If they need more parking, they can do more parking under this. So, but if they don't need it and they don't want to have that, they can have that choice.
Just like they were talking in here, that they wanted to be able to, what was it? When the thrift store was, the thrift store was talking about pushing cars out of their lot into the neighborhood too.
And they could park on the street. It is true.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. I'm just concerned that we don't want to start pushing cars out into the neighborhoods because it will be
I think
detrimental.
there's a difference between parking on the frontage right next to your business and parking 2 blocks into a neighborhood. I'm drawing a line. To me, there's a difference between I have frontage on a street. I mean, there's people that park at work at Fairway that park on all the sides
Yes.
on the street. That's totally fine.
That's what they.
It's allowed. It's what we expected and intended to keep their parking lot open to customers, right?
And that's
That's
what Fairway
different.
expected them to do too. So.
Right. But that's to me a lot different than saying 2 blocks, a high concentration of multiple blocks away from a business is being parked up and down the street with people that's displacing all opportunities for residents to take advantage of it. So take like a scan situation when you have the college students taking up parking because they're going to go to class. That to me is infiltrating a neighborhood. The incidental use of a street next to the business or a couple of people maybe being half a block away, I don't view that as a significant infiltration issue. That's
I see the problem out along Mortensen. They push those apartment houses sometimes push kids out into the neighborhood.
So that's not retail though. So again, that's and very
the problem
few-
is real.
that's a debate of whether using public parking is a problem. It's public parking. So
Yes.
we don't have parking permits. City council has refused, and even the most intense situations of not having parking in front of your house to do a parking permit. So their view is it's public parking. It's available to all. So if there's complaints, they could put hours of parking in, just like we do in Scan. But from a zoning ordinance perspective, we don't see that as a common issue across the city. We do not see a ton of apartment complexes parking outside of the boundaries of the project. It can happen, it does happen, but it's not common. So for retail, I think we don't believe it's an infiltration issue if we shorten or lessen this amount. I don't think retail would be it. It's the entertainment, the restaurants, the bars, things that are much higher concentration of people that people are willing to walk to. People aren't really willing to walk a ton to carry goods back to their car.
Sure.
At least that's my experience.
Any other questions or comments for city staff? Okay. With that, we'll open the public comment period. If any members of the audience would like to come up and provide comment, they're free to do so. Seeing none, we'll move on. So yeah. Are there any final comments from the commission or from staff? Then I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of alternative 1, that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommends that the city council amend the minimum off-street parking requirements in table 29.406 parent 2 as presented in attachment C to reduce the parking for retail sales and services general to 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes. All right. Thank you. That brings us to commission comments. Anyone have any?
I have one, I don't know that it'll ever be in our bailiwick, but I had an email from somebody who was concerned about, and maybe they've already done this, I don't know. The city council is considering making new residential developments zero emission. So you wouldn't be able to have like a gas furnace or a gas stove, is their concern. That everything would be electric. Is that something that's going on, or there's much discussion? It sounds like you know something about it.
I know about it. That's a little off base.
Okay.
So the city council voted at their, so I'll go to staff comments. I'll bring it up as staff comments.
Okay.
Like, I wasn't going to talk about that, but I can.
I'm just curious.
No problem. Any other
commission
comments? Okay. So I got three.
My standard question. Next time?
I do have a question. We're trying to understand if we would have a quorum on July 5th. I don't think we had a full response to that question yet. So just by show of hands, who would not be available on July 5th? So for sure, 2 would be gone.
I mean, I'll be driving back, and
You can just say.
it's a 50-50. Yeah, it's a
Just
no.
say you're-
It's a no.
Okay.
It doesn't work real well to call
Rachel-
in.
Too much info.
It doesn't work real well to call in because I tried that one time.
Yeah, I know. On and on. Okay. All right. So at least 2 would be gone. Possibly if 1, 2, 3, 4 would still be here, and we don't know about Jim. Okay. We'll keep that in mind. Maybe. I don't know for sure right now. There's some things that are hovering about. So possibly for the 5th, if not for sure on the 19th. So if there's no other commission comments, I had 3 things of interest probably to you that may eventually filter down to us, or some of them definitely will filter down to us. So I'll start with the climate action plan. So the city council for over a year and a half has been working through a community climate action plan. So a climate action plan at this scale is looking at how the community functions in relation to greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just about city operations. It's about how do the activities within the city contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the operations of the power plant, that's driving, that's use of utilities, generation of trash, anything that results in the use of energy or in decomposition that can have emissions related to it. So as they worked through that, city council asked their consultant originally to evaluate, and I'm not going to get into all the details because I don't remember all the benchmarks that go into this, but essentially, how do you get to kind of the international expectation of getting to net zero emissions by 2050? So what would have to happen in the city for the whole existing city plus growth to get to a net zero balance by 2050? The consultant came back, couldn't quite do that, even so they put a whole host of measures out there, and I'm not going to remember the exact number, but let's say they could get 80% of that goal done with very heavy investments in a lot of different things to make that happen. So it wasn't even seen as feasible to get to the net zero by 2050. So council took that information and said, okay, we want to set an aspirational vision for the city. We're going to accept this climate action plan that identifies what the sectors are, the general emissions related to them. And then it has what they call big moves. So some of the more significant things that could be done that would have significant impacts in the next 5, 10, or 15 years towards emissions. In the world of climate change management, moving away from natural gas and fossil fuels towards renewable energy, basically powering electric, is the biggest solution. It's the number one thing. So when you talk about removing natural gas appliances from the equation, Iowa has a law that says a city cannot forbid the use of natural gas appliances, nor can you preclude the deployment of natural gas into a subdivision. So that can't happen.
Okay, and that's kind of what I was
So that's
thinking,
not
too, if that was the
not
case.
possible in the state of Iowa.
Mhm.
That law's been on the books for 2 years. So you can see why it was adopted. So that you can't just outright ban it. That's not possible. That doesn't mean that a developer couldn't agree to it. It doesn't mean that the city couldn't provide financial incentives for you to not put in natural gas into your home and to go all electric. But no, there won't be an outright ban. And anybody that has it now, it's not going away. So that's why I say it's a little off base. So one of the measures in the plan related to new development is to look at what can we do to get to what's classified as a net zero ready structure, and then eventually to be a net zero structure. So the distinction there is a true net zero means you produce as much electricity on your property as you consume. So that's a true net zero property. So how you do that is you have to, you typically can't just size up your solar and do it. Plus that's not the most cost effective way to do it. So you do have to build a tighter building envelope and manage your insulation and your efficiency measures, and then you design the solar to fit, or your wind energy, whatever it is, it's a renewable energy source to meet your energy demand. So that's a true net zero structure. Net zero ready means that you design it with those calculations in mind, but you don't actually go the step of installing the solar or going to the wind. So maybe you can't afford the extra $25,000 for the solar panels at the beginning, but your house is designed that when you could put that on, you would then be zero ready. So again, right now, the climate action plan is adopted as a visioning document, basically. It will lead to a specific work plan sometime this winter. And a couple of things, like maybe these net zero standards might filter into the development review process, maybe into zone change agreements, annexation agreements, things like that. And there could be some mild tweaks to the zoning ordinance to support different attributes that might reduce vehicle travel, things like that. But we can't, we can't control the vehicle fleet. Like that's just out of our control. We can't, there's just a lot of things that can't be done. Maybe more extreme measures or things that happen in Europe or in larger cities that have total autonomy on how they approach things. So in Ames, it'll be a more measured approach, but we do have a very high visioning bar about trying to do that. So city council will make decisions, again, probably on an annual basis about what their priorities for the work plan are. A big one is going to be changing the energy mix for Ames Electric. Now, we can't control Alliant, we can't control consumers, can't control Mid-America. So again, there's these things where we have the advantage of having our own electric plant, but they don't serve everybody. So as a community, there's going to be different sectors, different uses that probably don't achieve our targets because they can't, or we're not able to control that. But Ames Electric will be a highlight of conversation in what they look for. And that ties back into trash, also into garbage, because we burn our garbage. And how does landfilling work? How, if you go to electric, how do you manage trash? So we have a pretty complicated system of energy production. So we'll be working through a lot of difficult things as a city going forward. So a few things will get to us, but the biggest issues will not be in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Any questions about the climate action plan?
What is going on with trash collection?
Honestly, I don't recall what the outcome of the last workshop was. So in May, there was a workshop. It's twofold in the city. There's the issue of how resource recovery works. What's the size and the needs for future demand for processing garbage, how to process recycling, and then again, how does that plug into Ames Electric for how we generate energy? So that's part of the equation. And then there's also the question of how the collection routes are structured or managed, or in reality not managed at all. So those two things are obviously related. And so council is spending some workshop time walking through the differences there. And I don't recall, they haven't made any decisions, but I don't even recall what the direction back to the city manager was on the next step to evaluate collection routes, and then how the resource recovery facility might evolve or change or get replaced in the future.
Yeah, because the one who we have sent us a letter saying they'll no longer do 2 stops a week. You can get another bin for so much, but
So we didn't tell them to do that, but I mean, so I don't know that was related to the conversation at all. So there's been no ordinance adopted that changes anything about garbage collection across the city. So, but it's possible. So, all right. So 2 other things that you will hear a little bit about. So last night we had a workshop with council with 2 agenda items. One is a property maintenance code for single family residential properties. So we currently have a property maintenance code for rental properties, but owner occupied does not have the same expectations. So the city council had asked inspection staff to prepare. There's 2 different things that are happening. Some additional standards are being created so that you can deal with nuisance complaints that would have applied to a rental property that don't apply to an ownership property. And then there's a lot of restructuring as well to clarify some of the nuisance laws that we have and how they can be applied so they're easier to enforce. But in general, you're adding a new set of rules to owner occupied homes related to nuisance complaints and property maintenance. Now, why that matters to you, one of the tools for code enforcement in the city is the zoning ordinance. So when the city council moves forward to adopt a new property maintenance code, I will probably be in front of you to do some edits to the zoning ordinance so that we don't have conflicting standards, or to just move them out so the enforcement is in one place, not in 2 places. It might just be a small number of things. Some of the things that we have are and I don't know that all of them will move, like lighting controls are in the zoning ordinance. The parking of trailers is in the zoning ordinance, but we also have a junked vehicle and some other ordinances that deal with vehicles and trailers too. So it's kind of in 3 places. Some other storage uses are in the zoning ordinance. Some vegetation clearance related to the right of ways there. So those are the kinds of things that would probably get moved out of zoning and put into a property maintenance code. And that'll have to come to you to look at any amendment to chapter 29. So that if you're interested in what council's looking at, go to the workshop from last night. The staff report has a long list, describes what we're doing. And then if you want to spend 2 hours, you can watch the meeting and watch council's line by line direction to staff on what to do next. So minor thing, but it will end up in front of you. I mean, I would be surprised if the public comment would be coming through the Planning and Zoning Commission versus just commenting on the new ordinance, but I guess it's possible people could come forward here as well. You're not really creating standards. You're more likely just moving them or deleting them. All right. And then the other item last night, council has a goal on the wall. We value diverse housing options for the community. And then one of the tasks that they have under that was to develop a strategy related to low and moderate income housing related to potential impediments to production, incentives for production of affordable housing, and potential for the specific strategy of land acquisition to facilitate affordable housing. So last night we gave a report, trying to get a little more structure to what does all that mean? What are the income categories we're looking at? What are potential impediments to development of affordable housing? What are incentive programs? Are they upfront funded? Are they after the fact assistance? And then in general, is just a broad picture of what affordable housing strategies usually cover. And then city council looked at that and considered that and said, well, there's also a parallel discussion related to market-based housing that's probably going to be brought forward here later this summer or early this fall. So last night they took all that information in. They made one motion to us, but in general, they'll be coming back to a future council agenda and give more precise direction on how to approach that. So all the financial issues won't come to the commission, but if they do find that there's zoning impediments to the construction of affordable housing, that might come back as a text amendment. And they didn't make any final decisions last night. They'll come back to a future agenda, and it might get combined with discussion of market-based housing impediments as well as demands for that as well. So then the one motion out of the meeting, you might not be shocked, was to address parking. So now I have direction to, we did in a PUD, you might remember this like 2 months ago, we edited that in the PUD, city council can approve a reduction of residential parking down to 1.5 spaces per unit if it chooses to. So the direction last night was to create a specific parking rate for affordable housing based on that kind of a concept that would also be subject to council approval. And the distinction here is that you have to be at least a 2-acre project to take advantage of a PUD. So if we write it as a use in the parking code, then it could be a smaller project that might be able to take advantage of that. And it would be discretionary. And like in the conversation last night, it might make a ton of sense in the middle of the city to have less parking. It might not make a ton of sense if you're by no transit and nothing else and you're on the edge of the city to reduce parking. So that's why it would be a case-by-case review of who's proposing it and what the site is. So sometime this summer, we'll come back with a text amendment related to affordable housing, specifically having a defined use in our code, subject to approval of an agreement and everything by city council. So the other issues about lot size, density, design requirements, all of that, no direction on those things. And then the last thing would be upcoming on this upcoming Tuesday, the 27th. We talked about the infill housing workshop. Council is preparing to move forward with allowing for accessory dwelling units and duplexes in single family areas. So on this upcoming Tuesday, they're going to get a final update of these. This is the parameters that we think we should go to the public for. So if assuming they buy off on that, they'll be directing staff to do public outreach. And I don't have a schedule for that, but we'll be doing some kind of public outreach, reaching out to single family neighborhoods to let them know what's proposed. And those will all definitely be coming back to you this fall in terms of how to integrate that into our residential zoning. So there's things moving forward in relation to housing across the city. That's probably the longest update I've ever given you.
I know this has nothing to do with us, and I know tomorrow there is a presentation of some kind. But I've been digging through the site and I cannot find anything about the RAGBRAI, in a map of how RAGBRAI is going to come into the city.
I would say go to Discover Ames because they're the ones that are in charge of the event.
I didn't find anything anywhere.
Hmm.
I mean, I've been digging too.
I've seen it.
Might check the RAGBRAI site too.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be registered on RAGBRAI to get into that site.
Or just the general RAGBRAI site though.
And there's nothing.
Okay, I can find out for you. I'm registered.
You're right. Yeah, because I want to know how I can get across this city.
Yeah.
They're going to come in on
Come in on
Wharton.
on R38, the Dakota Avenue up to Mortensen, and then Mortensen over to because
Trice.
they want to go through Jack Trice Stadium with the bikes,
And then they're going to
they kind of go from there, and everybody just kind of scatters
Yep.
goes to wherever they're camping.
leave the same way.
Yeah,
They're going to come into
Leave the
town
same
and
way,
leave
yeah.
the same way.
yeah, we got the same way the next morning.
Yeah, what streets? They got to close streets because I've been through this before.
Yeah, they're going to close. I mean, they're going to be on Mortensen, right? They're not going to close South Dakota at a Highway 30 interchange. Like you're going to have to deal with people going.
On the
Through
way
there,
out,
right?
they're going to have to.
So I'm not in charge of that. I can't tell you how they're going to manage traffic.
Come on,
So
you're
talk to
tied
Discover
in.
Ames. They're in charge of RAGBRAI. So, but yeah, Mortensen in South Dakota is where it's at.
All right. There's no other staff comments. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right.